our own understanding of where we are in relation to the history of the lands that we are on. For example, whenever I start a lesson at our museum, I acknowledge that I am on Treaty 13 lands, which are the ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, which includes the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, from time immemorial into today. And we always acknowledge them to understand who was here in the past, but also to honor them and respect them by saying their names and thinking about our own connections to the land as well. I'm descended from settlers who started coming over 150 years ago from Ireland. The last member of my family to make that big crossing was my grandmother. It was World War II. My grandfather went to Scotland with the Canadian Air Force. They did not trust him with a plane. That was a bad idea, but they thought a truck would be okay. They were wrong. He broke it. My grandmother was the mechanic from the Scottish Women's Auxiliary who went to rescue him. And that is the story of how I came to be here today. So if I was doing this activity with my students, there are some things that I would modify based on where I am. And there are always regional differences, which is why it's really important to establish those connections in your own community as well. For example, in Ontario, we wouldn't use the word tribes, we would use the word nations. Indigenous would be capitalized. There are a few other changes that we would make. And one of the things that our Indigenous teachers really emphasize is that it's really important when you are working with displays about Indigenous people that you make that connection to today because they are still here. So that's something that I would encourage my students to do, is almost create a timeline showing what happened in the past, but also how those traditions, those beliefs, those values are still present today. So it's really, really important, and a lesson like this can really help you to make those connections in your community. And there's lots of ways you can do that. I know a lot of the boards in Ontario actually have lists of knowledge keepers who are happy to work with your class. In the better times, when we're not dealing with a global pandemic, the ROM actually runs a program called Hack the ROM, where we pair classes up with Indigenous teachers to make digital projects based on Indigenous objects that live at the museum. So there are lots and lots of ways to make those connections, and then building a whole gallery out of them is a really, really great way to deepen that understanding and deepen that respect as well. And then in this gallery over here, this gallery is all about immigration and settlement, but it's also about mechanics. So we need to learn some basic mechanics of Minecraft. We learn that we have to add a lever so that we can open this door. And now we can look at the mechanics that are in action, and we can start to add our own creation. So this is a place to really start to dig into your understanding of engineering, about motion, and really kind of get creative and add these things as well, while also reflecting your understanding about, what life was like in the past, before we had a lot of the modern conveniences that we take for granted. So you can really start to see how building something is a really great reflection of understanding. You cannot build a thing if you don't understand it, at least to some degree. And then there are details that you can add that really kind of flesh out that understanding. That we have the great details of the cloakroom over here. So those are the 3 activities that are built into this world. But if your students are anything like my students, when they are presented with this, I'm going to see if I can back up and get all of it into frame because it's just ginormous. When my students are presented with this massive, massive, massive build, and most of it is empty, they're going to start knocking down walls to see what's inside and what they can do in there. And I would say if you have the time to let them do that, go for it, and have them build additional galleries to reflect understanding of other things. Like this could be a year-long project. There's enough space here, certainly, where you could add a gallery to reflect almost every unit that you do. So this, again, the parking lot gets me every time. It's madness. It's so detailed and so accurate. It's great. So this is that world. And then we're going to jump to another one now. We're going to take a look at the Pacific Science Center. And this is a little bit different approach. So with this one, I'm going to save
and while you
and
do
exit.
that, Sarah, I'll
Yeah.
the audience any questions about that museum. Teachers, feel free to ask any questions about letting your students play and create in here, or feel free to see if your students have any questions right now for Sarah. That was incredible, Sarah.
Okay, jumping into this one. So this one I love. This museum, the Pacific Science Center, is actually full. And one of the things that I did, I went to their website, but it's still closed to the public. So I actually asked them for floor plans to help orient me to what's in here. Because you can see it's actually full of things, but because it's Minecraft, I needed just that little bit of help of the floor plan to really know what is going on in each of these spaces. So that's one thing that I would consider, like as you're building things, is if it's not immediately clear what something is because you're using Minecraft blocks to approximate what things look like in your museum, have an explanation. And one of the things you can do, I'm just going to add this here. I'm going to talk about this again. So if I'm going quickly, please don't worry, because I will come back to it, I promise. Is you can actually add NPCs pretty much anywhere. I apologize if anybody hears my cat singing at me. And what you can do with NPCs, if you give them a name, I'm going to call them tour guide, and you can add their dialogue, but you can actually add links to things as well. And one of the things that you could do is either in this world, figure out where things are, especially if you have a chance to visit the real thing, or in a world that you're building, give a video tour, add it on something like Flipgrid, and then add the link to your Flipgrid tour to an NPC to help people orient themselves to the space and understand how to use it. So that's a trick that I love to use. So I'm actually going to skip us up a couple of levels. And again, the detail in here is just phenomenal, and I love it. We've got our courtyard out here. If we go in here, we have the elevator, which is great. We've got the tide pool over here, which is one of my favorite details. I love finding these in science centers. My students would fill this up with fish. That's just the way my students are. If we keep going, we get to the planetarium and my favorite room. So I'll do a quick peek in the planetarium. There it is. So there's our big dome where we can project our stars. And then we have my favorite room. We have the dinosaurs. I just always have a soft spot. Dinosaurs is my favorite gallery to teach in at our museum. So I am really, really happy when they're here. There we go. Wandering through the Dinosaur Gallery. I also love the touch that, so in the museum, there are places where the public can't go. In our museum, we have to swipe in with badges, and I love that we have the steel doors for the behind the scenes staff areas as well. And now I go and get myself completely lost. So in this build, you get to explore the Science Center. And again, one of the things you can do with your class is when you find these things in here, find examples of the real things, either in museum collections or other educational sites. Again, sources are really important. And again, you can add tour guides explaining more information. So you could have links to your sources, which is always great, talking about getting reliable sources. So I'm always adding this one. And the source one. So you can always go back and check your information and make sure that it's right. And then if we wander out here, I love that people have actually been to the Pacific Science Center. That's great. I'm going to try and find my way out. Yes, okay. We've got the Imax Theater over here. There's actually a projector you can turn on and off, which I love. And then we can head outside to the beautiful gardens and our outdoor courtyard. And so in this world, if we head over, I would love to see this in real life someday, because just in Minecraft, it's beautiful. If we head over here to Building 4, Building 4 is empty. So building 4 is where, again, your students can take the learning that they do in science and add it to the Pacific Science Center. And this is something that museums actually do. At the Royal Ontario Museum, we have 3 different galleries that usually host rotating exhibitions. We have a super giant one, we have a kind of normal size one, we have a really small one. But this does happen. Exhibits rotate through museums so that we get to, keep learning and keep our information up to date as we discover new things, which is really, really cool. I'm seeing a lot of comments about how accurate it is. That's great. Yeah, one of my favorite details in this one, see if I can find it. I think it's over here. Yeah, it's this one. So again, we have this staff-only door. And this is actually office space. There's a little sign that says "Imagine offices here." And if you have the time, it might be a great touch to have the students add their own office. That is actually something that I've done with my students in some of my classes. If we have 8 weeks of research, the first day is always starting with your office in your research center. And it's where you can add things to the walls about what you're learning about. It's a good place to store the book that you're documenting things with, which I'll get to again. Students are asking if it's possible to make a functional elevator. Thank you for that question. Short answer, yes. Long answer, I am going to talk about it shortly. Yeah, there are so many different ways you can do it. The way that I usually do it with my students, and I'll show you one of their examples, is sort of one of the easier ways. But if your students are really gung-ho about doing all of that engineering, there are definitely, for sure, Becky, there are tutorials on YouTube that show how to use a whole bunch of different blocks and a whole bunch of different mechanics to actually make functional elevators. It gets a lot of, into the weeds with like honey blocks and slime blocks and observers, and it's great. But there are other ways as well. So this is not a functional elevator, but I'm glad that it is here because that is one of the things that we are going to talk about again. So we're going to leave the Pacific Science Center behind because there is this brand new world, and I don't actually know if it is out yet, and I don't know if Becky wants to add anything about it. But this is something that I got to test out with my students this Saturday. So this is Create Your Own Museum. Oh, that's a really good point, Becky. So when you're doing your tutorials, check the versions that the tutorials are done in. Minecraft Education Edition runs on the Bedrock engine, and some of the Redstone is a little bit different between versions. So you always want to, if you're looking for tutorials, look for the Bedrock version, especially if it's more complex. The elevators that I'm going to show you will work in any version. But yeah, so this is the Create Your Own Museum world. And Becky, did you want to say anything, or should I just dive in and show what my students did?
Yes, you dive in, and then I would love to share a lesson idea at the end, but I don't want to like duplicate anything because you're doing such an amazing job sharing. So I will be happy to share a lesson idea or two at the end here if it doesn't already come up.
All right.
Okay.
So this, again, this museum, this world is gorgeous. So this is what I did with my students on Saturday. So I will do 8-week courses with my students, but I also do on Saturday a fun zone. So that is a drop in, drop out whenever you want. We have sort of half an hour to set the stage and then an hour to build. So everything that you're going to see in here was done by students in 1 hour. And so the challenge that we had for this one is we have this absolutely gorgeous empty museum, and the students had to create a gallery about something that they were passionate about. So we started off by talking about what is a museum and what are they for. And one of the things that we actually got into is the idea that originally museums were about collecting what people considered curiosities, especially from cultures that they were not familiar with. And museums have kind of a history of not entirely ethical collections practices that museums today are really trying to move away from. So one of the defining things that we have today is that if you are going to do an exhibition about a particular culture, especially if it is a culture that is still here, is that you do not do that exhibition unless somebody from that culture is on your build team. So again, there are ways to establish those connections, and your students come from diverse backgrounds. They have that ability to bring their own voices to the museum as well. So really encouraging my students in this fun zone to think about their experiences and the things that they care very much about. And you'll see kind of some examples of that as we go in. The other thing I had them consider is we want museums to be places that are welcoming to everyone, that everyone is able to access and enjoy. And one of the things that the students caught on to pretty quickly is in this beautiful front stairway, one of the students said, well, what if somebody is in a wheelchair? And we thought that that was a great thing that we could address right away. So we built a wheelchair ramp over here. And I actually think the wheelchair is up on the other side. So I'm just going to grab one. So we have the thing with wheels in Minecraft is our minecart. So the idea is you get in here, you push this button, and the wheelchair ramp will take you through the front entrance and down here. And yep, there's our other one. So we are stuck. But there we go. I'm going to hop in here and I'm going to clear that one so somebody on the other side can use it. Yep, helpful sign that a student made. If you need a wheelchair, please take one and return it when you are done. So there are some other wheelchairs that people can use. This is the other thing that my students thought it was important to add. So we have a land acknowledgement. We actually had a really big discussion about this one because we are learning remotely. I was hosting this world for them, and we had a really big discussion about what lands do we acknowledge if we're all on different ancestral lands and territories. And so we decided that we were going to acknowledge the land that the computer that was hosting the world was sitting on. So that is my usual land acknowledgement, acknowledging the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Acknowledge and pay respect to the peoples who have been here from time immemorial through to today. And the other thing they added was Tamara, who has links that I share with them a lot, to 2 sites where you can actually learn about what traditional territories you are on. So there's 2, Whose Land and Native Land. We included them both. So those are there for people to click on and investigate where they're from and who has been there since time immemorial, and add that to your museum as well. Okay, so I'm going to go explore some of the things that my students built in an hour. This was one of them. We added an elevator. So in this elevator, there's a pressure plate because we talked about somebody in a wheelchair would have trouble pulling a door open probably. So you go in here and there is a scaffold that will take us up to our top floor. There's a button so that we can get out. There we go. And I'm going to go down. I'm going to get to the top floor a bit later. So that was one of our solutions for accessibility. There we go. The other thing, so down here, there's this one little stair. So there's 2 solutions for that one. One of them is a chair lift, or the Minecraft version of that. You can find those in a lot of museums, especially older ones that were built before this was really a consideration. And there's also a mini wheelchair ramp that will go up and down for you. There we go. And so this gallery, this student wanted to talk about medieval times. So they figured that they could get the horse models in there, but couldn't stop them from moving around. So they're animatronics. So these animatronic models show how the horse skeleton looks under the horse's skin and shows why horses need protection, just like the knights did. And so these are more animatronic models showing how horses had armor. And so I think their intent was to eventually have an NPC that would link into the photos of the collections that they were basing them on, but in an hour they didn't have time to do it. There's a gallery of different kinds of armor, which actually talks about how mail came first, but then when bows got really strong and arrows could go through, the plate armor came and replaced that. And then one of the things that we talk about a lot is how medieval fashion was actually really colorful, and that tends to kind of fall out of the history because things fade over time. So they really wanted to show really colorful costumes, and they talked a little bit about the natural sources that these dyes could come from. So the shells were the source of the purple that was really rare, which is why it tended to be the color of royalty. They were fascinated by the red color that you get from bugs, so that went in there. So that's kind of the first display. And then as we go around, so this is a museum like the ROM. Some museums specialize in one thing. Some museums like the ROM talk a little bit about everything. And that's what this museum is, because we have a whole bunch of displays in here. This one was a nature gallery. So just talking about different environments and things that you can find in them. They had some plants. They didn't quite get to adding animals, but if they'd had time, they would have. And this student really wanted to point out that they have a sign language interpreter in this gallery to interpret for people who are deaf or who need that sign language, and a tour guide to kind of give help with navigating around the gallery and reading all of the labels. There's also a mobility aid here, so if you have trouble walking around this huge forest, you can use this mobility aid. There are stops here so that you can get off if you need to. There's another stop so that you can read the sign. So he really thought about the plan for this gallery and how people were going to move around it. This gallery over here was by one of our newer Minecrafters, hasn't been at it too long, and this gallery is one of my favorite examples about how you might want to start with a floor plan first. So understand the area that you have, the space that you have, and plan to fill that whole area. So his build was about a day in the real world and in Minecraft, and sort of crowded city streets in large cities. So he really did that work to make sure that he had populated this area both with armor stands and with a few NPCs. But you really do get the sense of a crowded city street in here. So I thought that this one was really neat. And I think he had a few plans to do other things, but he didn't quite get the time to do that. And I'm going to apologize because getting out of his gallery is actually a challenge, and I don't want to have to break the door. Ah, I did it. Hooray. Okay. This gallery was a student who, this was actually his very first time playing Minecraft. He had watched a lot of YouTube videos, but had never had a chance to play for himself. So what he really wanted to do was a modern house. So we talked about how his gallery would be the gallery of modern architecture. And kind of looking at those elements that made this a modern house. So for his very first time playing Minecraft, he got pretty far in an hour. This gallery was unfortunately empty, but this gallery is our gallery of the environment. And I will admit I am not entirely sure what he intended to do with these ones because he didn't have time to get his labels in, but you can see how he started setting up ecosystems for his critters to live in. You can see another one over there. This was going to be another display. And then we head upstairs. We've got a couple of galleries upstairs, but one in particular that I want to focus on. So this little one was the Gallery of Plants. This is the Horse Gallery. The student really liked horses, using the NPCs to talk about what horses need in order to keep them healthy. He did actually think about accessibility in getting onto a horse. So there is a little elevator that goes up and over and back down so you can come and pet the horses. Some important horse facts on the signs that are scattered around, so we know how long the neck of the horse is. These NPCs spell out horse. Oh, that was really fun. Figured out that he could do that. And talking more about horses. So again, really using this gallery to talk about something that he was very, very passionate about, and this gallery was really personal to him. This gallery was made by three of some of my more experienced Minecrafters, and they wanted to do a gallery of the different environments and mobs that you could find in the world. So there is a lot to explore in this gallery in all of these cases. But one of the things that I wanted to point out is you can see that there's a lot of empty lecterns here because they didn't actually get a chance to finish. But this one is here. They were using the books and the lecterns as labels. So one of the things that you can do is you can use the book and quill, and you can also use a camera if you want to add visual labels to make labels that people can interact with. And they also have the immersive reader, so there is our accessibility component as well. But I'm just going to quickly grab a camera and a book. And there we go. Okay, so I have the camera and the book. So if I wanted to create an e-label, I could go and I could take a picture of this, and then I could add it to my book and quill. All the way down to the bottom. Boop. And then I could add all of my details about the end. And then if I had more information that would fit on just this one page, I could actually add another one. And the reason why these are in here is because we talked about how at the ROM, sometimes we have, especially in the traveling displays, we have more information than we can fit just on one label. So we'll actually put iPads that you can swipe your way through. And that's how we can fit more information into a smaller space. So the lectern and the book and quill are kind of our version in this world of those iPads in front of the cases. So I really like how they were using all different kinds of label designs to convey their information. They started building some here, and they had item frames to be able to add kind of that visual cue as well. So that gallery had a lot going for it in the way of just really creative label design. And then this is the final gallery that I want to show you. This gallery was by one of our students, and he took very seriously that idea that you do not build a gallery about a culture that you are not part of. But this student is Chinese, and he really wanted to have a gallery that reflected him. So he built the Gallery of Chinese Traditions. So he didn't quite get finished all of his labels, but was very excited about the idea of the cats. We have some Chinese mummies over there. Noodles, very, very important. The fish shop, and he actually had kind of a mini game that he was going to build where you could actually fish for things in here. And he started using the armor stands to populate it as well and to show kind of how to interact with his gallery. And this was getting a little bit into some of the ideas of the tombs, but he didn't quite get finished that as well. But I really love that gallery because it really shows how he took that idea of making sure that his voice was heard in a museum and really took it to heart and ran with it. All right, so Becky, is there anything you want to add to this?
Thanks, Sarah. I would love to add one lesson idea that is a really exciting one that we actually just launched with some girls in a girls club, but we can do this lesson with, anyone, anywhere. And that is to a lot of students study biographies. They might be studying, women in STEM or world leaders, or maybe they're studying about a past leaders of their country. This can be applied to lots of different content areas, authors certainly, but basically students research someone that they look up to, maybe someone who is a role model in a field that the student is interested in, a teacher, an engineer, an architect, innovator, a mechanic, someone that in a field that they're interested in. And then the students design a museum exhibit around that person, maybe that period in history, as kind of a jumping off point. Then the second part of the lesson is where students think about their own future. So because they've just researched this role model and think about their lives, the characteristics of success, of ways that they made a difference in the world, students think about themselves in the future, and they actually plan a museum exhibit of their own future life. So it's a little bit goal setting, it's a little bit metacognitive, it's a little bit like vision board style, but students think about if they were to go out and do amazing things and change the world, which we hope they all can do, each in their own very unique way, what would their museum exhibit look like 50 or 100 years from now? So that's a really exciting way to kind of put a twist on goal setting and looking to the future. And then a third lesson that we've done with mechanics specifically in this world is to have students design, speaking of elevators, to have students design a mechanism to travel among the exhibits. So some students use, rails and mine carts. Students do all sorts of creative teleportation things to get quickly between the exhibits. And that's kind of a fun extension activity if students have finished creating the exhibits themselves to do some sort of, transport system between the exhibits. And then I saw a question about the rainbow blocks, and I'm not sure if Bridget and her students were talking about these pillars, which are color changing blocks. So that is an Easter egg, kind of. I mean, it's very obvious, so it's not super secret, but almost all of the Digital Labs worlds have this color changing block somewhere in there as just a fun shout out to not magic, but like to fun and inspiration and the things that you can do with Minecraft that you may not, always think about. So the way that I like to kind of use these blocks is if you look at your mouse and if you're using an external mouse, if you use that center mouse wheel, that's like a copy. And that will copy that block into your inventory, and you can see it color changing in the inventory. And then you can go repurpose that block anywhere you like in the world. So kids can use that as well. It's just a mod on a block that allows for a little bit of fun and excitement.
Yeah, we actually had a comment about that. I have one student who, he's at the point where he only wants to do fun zones if there are mods. He's like, are there mods in this one? And I showed him, he's like, okay, that's kind of cool. and yeah, so the students figured out that
engage every kid however we can.
They figured out that they can pick it up. So I know a lot of them, they didn't get around to it, but a lot of them had plans for these blocks. So that's another really, really cool one.
Well, thank you, Sarah. The way that you've shown, such a huge variety of options is so inspiring because kids can we talk about Minecraft being a low floor and a high ceiling, right? We can do entry level, just get something built. We can do the sky's the limit, color changing blocks and redstone mechanics and all sorts of creative, scale displays. So you've shown such a wide variety. I love it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we would have done if we'd had more time, and I just want to call attention to before we leave the world, is that there is a ton of green space outside this museum as well, and just getting the kids thinking about what kinds of things they could build in there. I can show kind of a quick example that I know some of them had talked about if we'd had more time in this world, and we may turn it into an 8-week one, but another course that I run deals with dinosaurs because of course, and then a lot of them had thought about being able to actually go into the world and in those big green spaces start to build these models of dinosaurs that you could find around. So that was just another idea that they had for using that garden. And of course, you can use it for talking about sort of different plants and ecosystems as well. But a lot of them were really keen to put those inside the museum itself. They wanted that outdoor space for the big stuff, for the big dinosaurs. So the last thing that I wanted to show you is actually a sneak peek This is a pilot that we launched this year, and it will be available in the lesson library hopefully by September. But this is a new program that the Royal Ontario Museum started called Museum Math, Rocks and Minerals. And it's kind of a two-part lesson. So in the first part, we are now standing in the research center in the fictional world of Rocklandia. This is the only place where you can find a active volcano and a mesa with a dinosaur dig and an ancient mountain range within walking distance of one another. And the idea in this world is that you are helping real museum scientists. So if I go over here, this is Catherine. She is a real scientist at the museum. There are links that you can learn more about her and the work she does. Over here is Dr. Kim Tate. And yesterday, Kim and I actually did a whole hour-long virtual lesson on the science of Minecraft, breaking down the actual science behind all the blocks, and that one was really fun. And so you can learn all about them. And the idea behind this world is for the first phase of the program, you actually go through these three doors to their respective research sites to help them learn about rocks and minerals. And along the way, you encounter a challenge blocking the path. You have to use your agent and code your way through. So that's phase one. But then in phase two, you actually come back, and after you've gone to all the research sites, this yellow door will open. And for phase two, there is a whole building area out here where students will build their own museum to showcase what they have learned about rocks and minerals, or if you've got a split class, one class can have one floor and the other grade can have the other floor, or you can make it your big project and put all your science in there. But that's what this area is all about. So this is the testing labs. So this is where we tested out a whole bunch of different ideas, which is why it looks like a giant mess. But there are some of the things that we've already talked about. So there are the different kinds of labels. We really talked in one of the virtual visits that we had about the importance of contrast on accessibility. So Minecraft has its own signs, but if you compare the two, it's really obvious that the slate and all the members of the chalkboard family are a lot easier to read because there is more contrast. There's more difference between the text and its background. And we talked about how that's really important in design, both on a physical label and when you're designing for digital tools as well. And the added bonus is that the members of the chalkboard family are editable, so you can edit those. We talked about using the book and the camera as visual labels. So this one is just starting to get into the clues in the world that tell you what kind of rocks they are and how you can use those clues to tell when you have a rock if it's igneous or sedimentary or metamorphic. We had talked about, again, using those NPCs and linking in our sources. So that is in there as well. A couple of the other things that we talked about are in here. So we've got different kinds of rail systems. This one, they actually wanted to know how you could make a stop that we had people get out. So we have an activator rail that kicks you out of the cart when you want somebody to stop and look at a display or look at a label. So that is in there. We have an elevator design. This we got into how you can use code to build walls, which is why it looks so funny like that. And then questions to think about. So these are the guiding questions about what kinds of things you want to have in your museum. And the reason we have this is because one of the things that we found is that sometimes students get so focused on just building like a cool, like interactive place that what they end up with is a giant playground and no answers to the questions. So we really wanted to have these guiding questions to make sure that as they were building and as they were thinking about all these great points about inclusion and accessibility, that they were also thinking about what questions is your museum answering? Because if somebody is coming to a museum of rocks and minerals, then they want to know the answer to, for example, what is the difference between a rock and a mineral? And then extension questions that are really important, like how does our use of rocks and minerals affect people in the environment? And why is studying rocks and minerals in space important for life on Earth? And that's a really important question that's close to home for Dr. Kim, who's over there. Kim Tate is actually part of the project. She is going to get to analyze some of those samples from the asteroid Bennu that they just went out and collected. And there are actually a lot of reasons that she goes into in some of her videos that we get to share about why understanding rocks and minerals in space actually is so important for life on Earth. So there's a lot of different things that you can dig into. And the last thing that I want to show is we actually, I am so proud that I get to share this. One of the students who was participating in the program, or one group, actually shared their world with us. So we can see some of the things that they were considering. This was their near finish. So this is where they give me a tour on Flipgrid so that I can add some feedback as somebody who works at a museum and who teaches at a museum for things that I'd still like to see. But it is pretty extensive, the things that they did. So again, they were thinking about accessibility. They have this way of moving people through the exhibitions. They have their rock experts who are giving some of that information and looking at the different types of rocks, which is great. There's a little bit of an accident here, which is why we have the floating rails, but we have the slightly more high-tech elevators moving us up here, and this I love. So we have an Indigenous cradle board. So this is something that they had learned outside of their rocks and minerals learning that they wanted to include as well, so that you have that that diversity, that representation. So again, other displays of things. We could get into how you can use anvils to actually add labels that will pop up. So that was one of the suggestions that I would have made. But they do have their NPC to talk about them as well. And we can have the elevator back down. Head out here. I think this is the world that had it. Yes. They actually figured out how to escape the boundaries of the build zone because they wanted to add a display that actually showed some of the negative impacts that mining can have. So again, one of the things that I would have them think about is, why it is still important and how we can do mining better than perhaps we have in the past. But I really love that they were actually thinking about this enough to add it to the museum so that people can think about it. And then they were getting ambitious with their builds. So yeah, that was one of the first examples we had of what students had built with this program. And you can see that there's still room to expand if they wanted to. There's a lot more stuff they could add. But this is a pretty good start to this museum build, adding this extension to rocks and minerals. So just checking if there are any questions. I'm just going to check. I think I might have one other example that I can run through while we go. Yep, I do. Yeah, so this one I love because they were really thinking about that accessibility piece and adding their wheelchair carts. And if we go here, there's lots of places to sit, which are important. You want people to be able to take that break that they need. They were thinking about people's needs. They have a cafeteria. There we go. And push the button and keep going. They were really into the effects of rocks and minerals on animals in the habitat. So we do have a lot of animal habitats in here as well. But we have our rock display coming up over here. And then there is a whole underground exhibition about how mining affects different animals. So I'm seeing a question, would teachers have access to these amazing worlds? So this world that I'm currently in will be in the lesson library in September or so. We're working on that now. The Science Center one is currently available, and I'm not entirely sure about the other two. Becky, did you want to talk about that?
So the Washington State History Museum and the Create Your Own Museum are both available at education.minecraft.net. And I can't speak to the plans to put it in the in-game library, just because I don't work for Minecraft education, and that's their decision. But I know Brian Bonham has been doing a great job of posting links up above in the chat, and maybe he can post a couple again here for us to those lessons, and the worlds come with them. So yeah, so a lot of what you've seen is available. And then those worlds are also always available at the Digital Labs website for free. They are both going in the library. Awesome. Thanks, Brian. And right now they're available at digitallabs.com in the lesson area for anyone to download.
All right, I'm just chilling out in the theater that they've built to teach people about rocks and minerals. Thank you so much for sharing those links. All
Amazing,
right.
Sarah and Becky. If everybody wants to come off mute just for a moment to say thank you, Sarah and Becky, we can hear your classes. Feel free to turn your faces on. Give a huge thank you on the count of 3. 1. All right, get the mute button. 2, turn your camera on. 3, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's mute back up. Bye, students. Thanks so much. Hello. We do have our door prize. So I'm going to go ahead and look in the chat right now. Anyone who submitted a question today is eligible. This is just our random selection of our winner in the chat is Brigitte. You are our chat winner. Brigitte, Miss Brigitte, if you can email mcedu@microsoft.com, we'll redeem your prize for you. And then, of course, I promised Twitter. We hope you followed Sarah and Becky on Twitter and shared your love for hashtag International Museum Day, hashtag Minecraft EDU. I am checking the Minecraft EDU hashtag right now. And our Twitter winner, do we have one? Oop, and we've got Math Barb is our winner today. Brigitte, it's just up in the chat. I'll type it again. So this is recorded, folks. We will have this on our YouTube channel if you want to watch again. You have the links to the lessons. Our goal is that you now take your students and go build all of those things that Sarah just inspired you with. I can't wait to see it. Be sure to share your students' creations online on our community forum. And if you liked what you saw today, we hope you become a certified teacher and mentor like Becky and like Sarah. Huge thanks, everybody. Enjoy International Museum Day, and we will see you at our next live event. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah.